Hello, everyone. Welcome back. So before I get into this one, it's still Saturday the 6th. And I would like to double check something before I go commenting. Go away. Okay. So, January 6th, 1919. That would be 5 years ago today. A 60-year-old man by the name of Teddy Roosevelt passed away. He died in his sleep. And Vice President Thomas Marshall, I think was vice president at the time, said something to the effect of, he died in his sleep because death was too scared to take him when he was awake. That was Teddy Roosevelt. I love the man. My keyboard's been acting up a lot. I hate it. So, we're at the 35-minute mark. We're going to take it to the end of Dwight Eisenhower. Let go.
Then he personally elected the next guy, which I'm forgetting. Could have been Taft. And then Taft is okay, but
extremely fat guy. Didn't he die in a bathtub?
No, he got stuck.
Something
in the
about
bathtub.
him in a tub.
Didn't he get stuck? He gets.
That's a myth. It never actually happened. He got stuck in a bath. He was so fat he got stuck in a bathtub. It didn't happen. That was what his enemies said to make him look bad.
Stuck and had to
in a
get
tub.
buttered out of the tub.
Yeah.
And that takes us to Wilson.
They still, by the way, teach that in school, which didn't happen.
Because then Taft ran against Wilson. Roosevelt decides he wants to come back.
And Wilson was
And he
New
split the vote.
Jersey governor of New Jersey or something?
I don't know. This is where I stopped.
Wilson is
Hold on. Did they just gloss over? I'm sorry. Did they gloss over Taft so easily? Taft wasn't a great president by any means, but if you want to go by the I wanted to say trust busters, but monopolies, Taft did. Even though Roosevelt was the first one who went after all these companies that are, monopolies that are big, and he started breaking them down, Taft did more in 4 years than Roosevelt did in his, we'll say 8 years. He didn't really get a full 8 years, but Taft went after him just as viciously, and he went after him harder. He broke up a lot more. Now, granted, the road had already been paved by Roosevelt doing it, but still, Taft did it. Taft also, his life's goal was not to be president. His life's goal was to be Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He's a lawyer. And since they're going to gloss over him so quickly, in Taft's later years, he ended up becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court after he was the president. Taft, you may not agree with things that Taft did. You may look at Taft and think, oh, he was a failure. This is a man who became a president and then later served on the Supreme Court. This is a man who he served his country. Some people could say, oh, he's garbage, he's this, he's that. What did you do? You may not like the things that he did, but this is a man who dedicated himself to working for the country in big situations. So I don't know a whole lot about Taft, but I do have 2 volumes on him, which I always look at it and I'm like, he's like Grover Cleveland. I'm like, I kind of want to read it. But I got all these other books that I want to read more.
don't know much about him except for for me, like some of the sources for what I know about these guys come from different places. So what I know about Wilson is because I read this book about, it was called The Peace to End All Peace, a book that everybody should read. And it's about how World War I, the end of World War I was how all the Middle Eastern countries were drawn. Iraq and Iran and Syria and all these places only exist because of British and American and French. These are lines these are countries. That's why we don't have like Kurdistan. There's no Kurdistan, but there's Kurdish people.
Yeah.
But they just didn't have a place at that table. So we just made Iraq. Iraq is a bunch of different people that don't belong in a country.
What's it called? It's the something. It's two names. It's whatever. But yeah, it was colonization. They just.
I know it's really not a great picture. There you go. Hold on. There you go. That is the in Stanton, Virginia, Kris Stanton, but it's Staunton, Virginia. Really? There you go. Really? There you go. That it wasn't blurry in real life, but that is the semi-blurry home of a young Woodrow Wilson, the 28th president. Don't believe me? December 28th, 1856. That was a sandwich. I'm not going to show you the sandwich. His presidential limousine. That's what greets you at the front door. You can't really see it too well. I mean, why would you, right? It says Woodrow Wilson, 28th President of the United States of America, 1913-1921. And they've got a little mask on him. It was COVID. This is the back of the house. I didn't get to go in. They had it shut down due to COVID, so I wasn't able to get in there. But the museum was nice, but in the basement of the museum, they have it. How come I just lost what I was at? They have it set up like a World War I bunker. What you're listening to, that's a guy who was shot in the face. What you're listening to is a real-life BBC, what you were listening to, real-life BBC recording from World War I. People screaming, a guy dying, tanks going over. It was one of the most, and you're walking in this basement, you're walking through what would have been a bunker. It was one of the most uncomfortable things I've, not uncomfortable like, it was uncomfortable I was scared. And I know that sounds weird. I was uncomfortable because it was dark, it was noisy, and I kept feeling like I could die down here and no one would know. And then I thought, that's how it felt like in World War I. It was very uncomfortable.
We're like,
the treaty or whatever the fuck.
Yeah.
But anyway, World War I was this just bizarre, stupid. Until World War I, Europe was still all kings and princes, and there was still a country called Prussia, and there was guys that went with like helmets with brushes on the top, and they marched around, and he was like the prince of. And it was still the whole,
Yeah.
and they had some budding democracy, but they still gave it enormous amount of power to their stupid fucking.
Yeah, to one family.
Yes.
They were all related.
Yes. And they were all
They're all
married to
cousins.
each other. Yes.
The leaders of World War I were cousins.
Kaiser Wilhelm
Yeah.
was an uncle to
Like
Nicholas Tsar, who
King
finally
George.
lost Russia.
Yeah.
And so they fought this ridiculous war and now they suddenly had this mechanized, they had machine guns.
Yeah.
All this, some of this shit was developed here during the Civil
Yeah.
War. And they just start firing crazy weapons at each other, artillery.
Yeah.
And the U.S. But the thing about that war was the Middle East. It was the Turkish Ottoman Empire,
Yeah, the Ottoman Empire.
was falling apart, and all of these European countries wanted a piece of what was going to be there. I think they had started to figure out that oil was in the Middle East. I don't have all this worked out in my head, but Wilson refused to get into the war because he knew it was an imperialist bullshit. And at
Yeah.
the time, America was against going out and sending troops other places for imperialism was something America hated, because it still wasn't that long ago that we were we were a colony.
Yeah.
So we finally did enter World War I, and I don't know why.
It was hard for the U.S. to enter because half the population's German. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Half's Irish.
Yes.
They fucking hated England.
Yes.
All this. And then I think it was like the Lusitania. They
I
just
guess that
kept
was,
doing
but
all
those
these.
things are always bullshit. I don't know
Yeah,
what
it
finally
was.
pushed
I
us.
think the Lusitania did have weapons on it.
Well,
Whatever.
we were selling weapons. We were probably
Yeah.
making money on the war. But when we entered the war, we didn't fight in the Middle East. We're the only allied country that we didn't send any troops.
We
to.
made up for it though. Later.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, we didn't get any.
But that was our position back then. We had there was a morality to what we did, at least politically, not economically. We never cared,
Sure.
because those levers were handled by industry, not by the government. Anyway, I don't know that. I'm getting way out of my depth.
No, World War.
But I don't know that much about Wilson. So then
I don't either.
Who's after Wilson?
Wilson after Wilson.
One of the things that Wilson gets tagged with a lot, and I know Greg, you said this. Another channel I like, Vlogging Through History, he said this, that Woodrow Wilson was a racist. Yes. That's not a reason for me to dislike him. No, I know. Hear me out. When Woodrow Wilson was a boy in Stanton, Virginia, when he was a boy, his father was a preacher and he had slaves. Wilson was born in 1856, so he grew up around slavery. When the Civil War started, his father accepted a job in Georgia, to get away from it all. Accepted a job in Georgia to preach. Took them there. Oddly enough, the town that he lived in, Woodrow Wilson lived in, there was a woman who, I don't know if she lived there or if her family lived there. Could have been both. But when the war started, I think this girl's family lived there, and she moved back there when the Civil War broke out. And this woman happened to live, or her family lived in the town that Woodrow Wilson's family had moved and preached in. And this woman was somebody who William Tecumseh Sherman fell in love with. I think he worked with her when he was a teacher, and it got nowhere. But he loved her. He adored her. So when he went through the South, raising hell, he went town to town, and he would tell the town, put the cotton in the town, and we won't burn the town. Well, a lot of the Confederate soldiers were like, no, you won't, and they would defend the town. They would burn the town. Next town would put the cotton out, But then the Confederate soldiers, before they fled the town, would burn it. All right, got to burn the town. The thought was, if we keep doing this, the people will stop the soldiers, the Confederate soldiers, from doing it, so that, saving their own property. Well, this town put all the cotton in the town, where he told them. And what Sherman did was, he would come up and he would collect the cotton, he would put it on a ship and send it north as kind of like contraband, and then it would just go up north, and they basically stole it, and they would make whatever they made. So this cotton in this town was left untouched. Sherman's people showed up. They did not touch the cotton. They did not burn the town. They pretty much walked right through the town and left all of it there. Went to the next town, took the cotton, sold it, shipped it off. And so Woodrow Wilson got to see, that, okay, well, they didn't do anything. They didn't harm the town. And it came out later, well, the reason why was because that woman's family. And I want to say that her family maybe had a cotton plantation. I don't know. Or he just didn't want to hurt the town in general. But that's a side story that I've always kind of enjoyed. But Woodrow Wilson did see it that way. But I get back to Woodrow Wilson. A lot of people don't like him because, he was a racist. He was good friends with the person who I think wrote or definitely directed what the hell's that movie? Anyways, the movie is a portrayal. Basically, it was made by the Klan, the Ku Klux Klan, and they're in blackface, and they're pretending to be on the rampage to kill white women and all this. And of course, the Klan comes in and saves the day. And oh man, it's going to hit me as soon as I stop recording. But Woodrow Wilson had that screened at the White House. And that was kind of like opening the door for the Klan and saying, hey, if you're out there, come on back. Because Grant had demolished them 30 or 40 years before. So Wilson probably shouldn't have done that. It was stupid. But then again, at the time, he was a racist. And, oh, I got to sneeze. He was a racist, and at the time, it wasn't really frowned upon to have done that. He did other things, refusing college admissions to black people. He said he was trying to protect them. Somebody else sneezed. He said he was trying to protect them. Whether that was true or not, I don't know. I don't hold... Somebody sneezed again. I don't hold any previous president who owned slaves. I don't hold that against them, because in that time it was legal. Now, if Andrew Johnson, number 17, after the Civil War, decided he wanted to own slaves, yeah, I'd have a problem with that, because we fought the whole Civil War to end slavery. So I would have an issue with that. I don't have an issue with Woodrow Wilson being a racist, because in a way you could say he was a racist, yes. But so was Lincoln. Lincoln may not have been as much, but Lincoln did believe that there was a difference in class in white and black, and he didn't necessarily want to free a black person and have him living next to him. So, and I know, vlogging through history, he's like, Wilson's a racist. Well, yeah. But you almost have to go up to Kennedy before you can start saying, well, I got to judge this guy on being a racist. Because Eisenhower had to force segregation in the 50s, in the 1950s. and Wilson's president in the 19 teens. So I do give a pass for that because I try to hold them accountable to their standard and to that era. You know, slavery ended in 1865, but it still took another 100 years for black people in the South to be able to go to school. So
Wilson would be
after Wilson was Wilson's 28. 29 would be he died in office, I think of a heart attack or a stroke. He was not a good president. A little corrupt. Teapot Dome scandal. Harding. Warren G. Harding. And his vice president was Calvin Coolidge. Calvin Coolidge, number 30. Ronald Reagan, he grew up when Coolidge was president. He loved Coolidge, thought he was underrated. Silent Cal, as he was called, once famously attended a party. Calvin Coolidge was not, I mean, obviously Silent Cal is your nickname. You're not known for talking a whole lot. He was a listener. He wasn't a dumb guy. He was a smart guy. He just didn't waste conversation on people that he probably didn't believe he should be talking to. Not saying he looked down at people, but he just didn't want to waste his time. That's just not who he was. I read a book on him, interesting, and yet at the same time, he didn't offer much. He did have had a son that got an infection playing tennis, injured himself, and then the wound got abscessed, and he ended up dying. He was a young kid. He was in his teens. And that really, I mean, losing a child. I don't know. I don't have any children, but losing a child, probably not as bad as losing a dog, but you get what I'm saying. I'm joking. But Calvin Coolidge attended a party one time, and at this party, the person who held the party set him at the part of this table with a woman. And this woman was known for just being a life of the party. People loved her. Everyone wanted to talk to her. And the guy made a bet with her, and he said, I'm going to sit you next to him, but I don't think you'll be able to get him to say much. And she was like, yeah. And he's like, yeah. So she goes down, she takes the bet, she goes down, sits down, and immediately looks at Calvin Coolidge and says, I was set here at this table to sit next to you. And I have a bet that I can get you to say more than 3 words in this party. What do you think? And he just looked at her and said, you lose. He never spoke again that party. Dude, Calvin Coolidge, the balls. He even gave himself 1 word. He could have said, nope. And he still wouldn't have lost. Calvin Coolidge. Crazy guy.
I'll tell you, hold on. Harding.
Don't care.
Harding was, he was corrupt. He was really corrupt, and that started leading to fucking whatever.
Then
cool.
Harding liked to go on tours, give speeches, bang women, and then go have more speeches and bang more women. And I think he was married too, but he loved to use his presidential penis. He knocked up a woman, got her pregnant.
Coolidge, same thing.
Yeah.
I was just watching shit on these guys. Who cares?
Yeah.
This is the Roaring 20s, though.
Yeah.
So shit's going well financially.
Yeah, they had their pandemic.
Real quick, Calvin Coolidge was not. He believed in small government. A lot of stuff that Coolidge believed in, you will hear Ronald Reagan say. Coolidge never said government isn't the problem and government is the problem, or government isn't the answer, government is the problem. I don't even remember now what Reagan said. It was a good one. Coolidge thought that the government should not be big, it should not spend, and he spent his time, because he was reelected, he spent his time cutting. Cut to save money, pay down the debt. He did a phenomenal job of cutting. But when you cut so much, so fast, to so many areas, you start cutting jobs. And eventually, you cut enough jobs, you cut enough funds to enough jobs, now you're suddenly not making, the country isn't taxing enough because it's not making it. And Calvin Coolidge cut so much that it started to hit a problem. And Herbert Hoover, he called him the Wonder Boy. He had him, Coolidge had Hoover in his cabinet because Hoover was a very brilliant man. He was rich, and he was a smart guy. But he was in mining, and so Coolidge called him the Wonder Boy because everyone thought so much of him. Hoover ends up getting elected president, and Hoover had warned him, you keep cutting like this and there's going to be problems. Coolidge didn't care because Coolidge wanted to pay down the debt. That was more important to him. He didn't see the warning signs that Hoover did, and if he did, he didn't necessarily care. But when Hoover became president, I don't think Coolidge cared at all because he hated him. And that set up the Great Depression in the 20s, which then eventually brings on FDR. But I'm getting ahead of all of it.
During all those guys, by the way.
And these guys are all corrupt.
Yes.
And it's just out of control. The economy's out of control, but everything.
Coolidge was not corrupt. Coolidge was not corrupt at all. I'm not a fan of Coolidge, but he had pros and cons to me, but he was not a corrupt guy.
And this is post-World War I.
So who's after Coolidge?
Coolidge is Hoover. After Hoover.
Right, Herbert Hoover.
And then that's shit's starting to turn around a little. And then here comes FDR.
Okay, so FDR, again, my approach is always who these guys were as people. And my favorite take on FDR is, what's his name? Churchill's. So I read this book, Churchill, and it's called Franklin and Winston, about their relationship.
Yeah.
Churchill was a nerd. He was a fat English drunk nerd, and he was a lord. He was a little Lord Fauntleroy nerd. Now, Franklin Roosevelt was also a rich kid.
Yeah, he was a nerd.
He was a nerd, but he was also really dedicated to the people. And he did a lot of things like up here in upstate New York. He had Hyde Park, and there's all these massive estates, Hyde Park, and the Vanderbilts lived next door. And he gave when he became president, he gave Hyde Park to the country. He said, you just let it be a museum for a time when people lived like this. And he persuaded his next door neighbors, the Vanderbilts, to do the same. He got all the upstate rich people. He said, move into the city and give these let these be places for the people to visit. So that's the kind of guy he was. But so Winston Churchill worshipped Roosevelt. He just thought he was the coolest. He was Americans came off really cool back then, and Churchill was like this, very and so there's a few intimate stories that are great about the two of them. One of them, Winston came to Hyde Park to plead the case, please come into the war, because Franklin wasn't coming into the war. So he spent like a night in Hyde Park, and they talked, and it was Churchill's feeling like for the first time that Franklin maybe liked him. And so the moment that's in this book is that he was in his car, Churchill, at night, and FDR was seeing him off. He was like at the window of his car, and Churchill said, "Franklin, I feel so good to have really spent time with you, and I feel a connection with you." And Roosevelt said, Take it easy. He said, just take it easy. And then the other one, and he just hurt his feelings. Then the other great thing was at Yalta, the conference at Yalta, where
this is good.
FDR and
Stalin.
Churchill are trying to get Stalin to come into the war on the Allied. He could have come in at either side. It was a toss-up, or he could have stayed out. But a Russian front to the war was everything. It turned out to be everything.
Yeah.
The same thing that happened to, it's what killed Napoleon, because Russia is just this deep forest, and anybody who invades Russia just gets absorbed and then stuck for the winter.
Yeah.
It killed Napoleon, and it eventually took Hitler. It's not where they lose, but it's where they drains. Okay.
Yeah.
So Churchill is like the European statesman. He's the one who's been fighting the war longer, and he's been mechanizing. How am I going to do this? And so when they get to Yalta, he goes to Roosevelt and says, let's talk, let's plan how we're going to get Joseph. And FDR goes, let's have lunch. We'll do it after lunch. And he's like, okay, when are we got to confab, you and me, we got to triangulate. You come from that. So good cop, bad cop, like which one do you want to do? And FDR is like, it's all right, Winston, it's all right. I got that. We'll talk about it. We'll definitely talk about it. And then they're at lunch with Stalin. And Roosevelt looks at Churchill and he says to Stalin, Joseph, look at Churchill. Look at what a fat, weird little man he is. Look at him with his cigar. Look how ridiculous he is. And Stalin is like shocked, and he looks at Churchill and he goes, bah! And he just laughs, and he fucking drinks vodka with FDR, and they fucking singing songs. Yeah. And FDR and Joseph are like best friends. Churchill is a fucking loser.
Yeah.
And then and FDR is like, so you come in our side? And Joseph's like, yes, I come in your side. Whoever. Yeah, of course I come in your side. He read the room, and he knew what had to be done. And it was throwing fucking Winston Churchill under the bus.
Yeah.
That's the one thing about that I hate, because Winston was such a good guy. But I think if it was reversed, Winston would have thrown FDR under the bus just to make sure that Stalin came in and was on their side, because they needed that extra effort. I mean, if Russia joins on the German side, that's just a longer war now. And I think with everything that Russia had went through with the Lend-Lease program, they did have a little bit of obligation to help out, but that kind of sealed it. It was a very dick move, but it was something that needed to be done. And he did end up smoothing it over. But Winston Churchill actually really got along with Harry Truman, which he was not sure he was going to. But he ended up showing up at Truman's, I think it was his museum. I know he showed up and gave a speech. But side note for Winston Churchill, when he did come and visit FDR, Churchill tells a story of spending the night in the Abraham Lincoln bedroom and went and took a bath. Got out of the bath, lit a cigar, walked out into the bedroom, completely naked, cigar in his mouth. Walks out, rounds the bed, and standing at the window, he sees an apparition. And he just stops. And he goes, hello? And the person turns and looks at him, and he says it was Abraham Lincoln. And Churchill just stands there and goes, well, Mr. President, and this is going to be something to the effect of, well, Mr. President, you certainly have me at the disadvantage. And he said, Abraham Lincoln smiled at him, kind of nodded and turned his head and looked back out the window. And as he looked out the window, he just faded away. And they believe that was the window that he used to look out all the time, to look out on Washington, just to kind of watch the people walking. And he would want to watch to see if the people were running, because if they were running, well, the Confederates are probably near, or they're going to, something's happening. But if people were walking around like normal, then he knew that the city was safe. But Churchill said that he saw the apparition of Abraham Lincoln. And he's not the only one from the British Queen Elizabeth also had an experience, I think in the 80s. So, I had something else I was going to say. Oh, Herbert Hoover's home, his boyhood home and grave I've been to, and you can, they're a quarter a mile away from each other. It's the same property, quarter mile, 1/4 mile distance. And if you're standing at the grave looking at Hoover and his wife, and you turn around, you can see the back of the boyhood home. And if you're standing in the back of the boyhood home, and there is a tree line, and the trees go and they stop, and then they start again. So there's this opening clearing to where you can see the grave and you can see the back of the house. And Herbert Hoover wanted it that way. He wanted it set up so there was a unobstructed view from the cradle to the grave. It's very cool.
Making him feel like a fat little fuck.
And he was mad about it. He was mad. Churchill was mad.
Yeah.
He like left there. No, but he got he won World War II at that.
Yes, he did. But he had to be humiliated.
Yeah. The best was, a cool one about Churchill and Roosevelt, not really Roosevelt, but just after Pearl Harbor.
Mm-hmm.
I think Churchill sent a cigar to the king and was like, we just won. Like as soon as Pearl Harbor happened,
he
was
knew
like,
because
it's
that's
over.
all he wanted was for them to
it's over.
There is one point where he needed to meet in person with FDR. So the British fleet took Churchill into the middle of the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah.
And the American fleet sent a warship that had FDR's yacht on, like just sitting on the deck of an aircraft carrier. And they lowered his yacht into the water in the middle of the ocean.
Jesus Christ.
And it putted over to the English. And they were ringed by, if the Nazis had come along, there was like 1,000 guns just for a meeting between those two guys on a yacht drinking whiskey in the middle of the ocean. So that's all I got on FDR. 3 times?
Yeah. And then he died.
So Truman. Okay.
4 terms. FDR, 4 terms, died in his 4th. Also, FDR's early policies after the Great Depression did not work. So he was using... Oh, you big girl. He was using policies that Herbert Hoover was using. He was bashing Hoover's policies. Then when he became president, he used the same policies. He just tweaked ideas. Hoover would throw out something and the stock market was going down, and then and he was like, okay, well, let's see how it does. And it would drop again. And he was like, okay, something new. This is Hoover. Hoover would throw something new. And he just kept wanting to see what would happen. So FDR comes along and FDR says, the economy's tanking. Throw an idea out. Boom, it hits. Okay, it's leveled out. Now, let's think of something else. For if this drops, let's think of something else so we're always ahead of the curve. That was FDR's thing. That kind of worked because they would say it's rising. Okay, it's leveling off. He would throw something else out. It stayed level. Okay, it's sinking a little bit. Throw something else out. Okay, it's leveled. It's going up. Throw something else out. He was always trying to stay ahead of the curve while Hoover was kind of watching it just to see what would happen. Hoover wasn't digesting things as fast as FDR was, but it was early on for Hoover. It wasn't for FDR. Yeah.
Truman.
Fuck the New Deal. We don't need to talk about it.
Yeah, don't care. We're talking about the guys, not the American history. So Truman was his 3rd vice president.
Truman was, Missouri, I think.
Yes.
And he was considered kind of a fucking loser, right?
He was hated.
Yeah.
Truman's family, so he's from Independence, Missouri, which is on the east side of Kansas City, Missouri. Yeah. It's like a suburb. Truman, growing up, his family from Missouri, they were all Confederates. Missouri was a Confederacy. I got a cough. They were all Southern sympathizers. Truman remembers his family talking about and remembering the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, and they loved it. Truman didn't really understand why they loved it so much, but Truman was a fan of throwing around the N-word. He was also racist, throwing around the N-word in jokes like it was nothing. He was a big Andrew Jackson fan. And the book that he used to read, one Andrew Jackson book, the same book. Stop. He'd read the same book once a year at a certain time of the year. It was interesting.
Yeah.
He was like hated the way that like Ted Cruz is hated. Like that kind of like, if you talk to people in Washington, they're just like, oh, I can't with that fucking guy for different reasons. But Truman was picked. FDR was like, who can we pick that's not going to fuck things up, you know? And they picked Truman. Truman was a guy, worked at a haberdashery. It didn't work out. He was one of these guys. His father was a farmer and he was running his farm. And then he went and worked at a bank and was kicking ass.
Yeah.
And then his father's farm failed, and so he took it over, and that wiped out like 10 years of his life was just being a farmer. And he had a haberdashery that didn't work, whatever. But so Truman went to the Senate, and then when he was a senator, his focus was graft during World War II. Basically, all the money, like billions of dollars, would be appropriated for the war and given to American industries, and they would all steal them. And every senator in Washington was stealing all the war. We were fighting Hitler, and everybody in Washington was just stealing money and fleecing their fucking pockets, like openly in front of everybody.
Yeah.
And so Truman like had this idea: let's not do that. Let's
try to win.
Let's try to win, and let's try to get the money to the soldiers who are dying. And everyone hated him. That's why they hated him. They fucking hated him. And even Roosevelt.
Hated him.
What's that?
I would have hated him.
Everybody hates the guy.
Stay out of this.
Yeah, everybody hates the one guy.
Yeah.
Even FDR was like, "Do we really want a guy who's like, oh, we need
a leader.
Don't steal the money."
Yeah.
So
yeah, they kind of viewed Truman as the guy who, like, with the glasses, like pushing the glasses up, like, well, hold on a second, fellas. But the money that he was finding was billions. So, considering we like to spend money, we're a wasteful country. This is a guy who's saying, hey, let's not waste this money. And they were like, who's this guy think he is, not letting us just burn money?
They made him vice president. Nobody liked him. They locked him out of like they always do to the vice president. So one night he's in Sam Rayburn's office. Sam Rayburn was like the greatest Speaker of the House ever. Sam Rayburn, there's the building that all the offices are in is the Sam Rayburn building. He was like the first great speaker, one of the great speakers. So Sam Rayburn, he's in his office playing poker with Sam Rayburn. They had a poker room, like a dark, original smoky room. And Truman is just a loser, vice president. Nobody talks to him. And he's playing poker with Sam and the other guys late into the night, just having a good time. And then he gets a call. There's a call for you. And it's Eleanor Roosevelt. She says, my husband just died.
Yeah.
You need to get to the White House. So out of habit, because nobody cared about him, he just went on the street alone and hailed a cab.
Yeah.
And there was one moment where he's in a taxi and he realizes, Jesus Christ, we're at war. And the president of the United States is in a taxi. Nobody knows where I am. And then the famous moment is that he got to the White House and Eleanor greeted him at the door. And he said, Mrs. President or whatever, is there anything I can do for you? And she says, Mr. President, is there anything I can do for you?
Yeah.
And everyone was like, this is going to suck.
Yeah. She's like, you're the one who's in trouble now.
Truman's going to blow.
Yeah.
But he was a very good fucking president.
He nukes Japan.
Dropped the bomb. There is a
and don't get it twisted.
don't get it twisted.
They had it coming. All right. There's this thing in history where everyone wants to be like, I can't believe they did that. Look into it.
No,
bro.
there's the account of the announcement of the Truman was on a ship when he was on a big ship and he was having a big banquet.
Yeah.
And he got the report in his ear, like George Bush, that they had just
it
dropped.
worked.
Yeah, that it worked. Because
Yeah.
nobody knew if it even worked. And he did a little ting, 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 ting.
Hey,
Everybody, just so you know, we dropped a bomb on the jet on Hiroshima. And it worked. And we're starting to, and then I think Nagasaki had dropped after also.
Yeah.
And it looks like we're
a day later.
And everybody applauded because there was no conflict.
Yeah.
Because the Japanese were never going to surrender.
Yeah.
And the amount of people that would have died, this is what it's like when you get deep into a war. How many people have died so far? How many more will die if we do it this way?
Yeah.
How many will die if we do it this way? So that's what happened. I don't have an opinion about it. I don't.
I do.
But that's fine.
But
I
here's the
don't.
thing. Here's the thing. Nobody cares about Dresden. Nobody cares about.
No, Dresden, way more people died.
Yeah, and it's also, and first off, not more horrifically. Both had like fire tornadoes.
Yes.
That just wiped out.
Well, they
it
set
was
the
terrifying.
atmosphere on fire.
Yeah, it's the scariest thing in the world.
It's awful.
It sucked the oxygen out of a city, and there were fire tornadoes.
Yes.
People were melting in the streets.
Yes.
Into the street. The
Going
pavement,
down the drains.
The pavement melted. So they'd run out of their houses and their feet would get stuck. And then they'd reach down and then just be stuck in the fucking... I mean, it's the worst thing in the world. But you know, they might have had it coming.
But
of course,
like
these are civilians.
There's a joke about two agents running into each other on the street in Hollywood. And one of them's like, hey, what have you been up to? And he goes, I produced a special for, whatever, just pick a, Celine Dion or whatever.
Yeah.
He goes, how'd you like working with her? And she's like, fucking cunt, fucking worthless, fucking spoiled brat, fucking drunk, fucking drug-addled cunt. I hope she fucking dies. And the other guy goes, she's my niece. And the guy goes, let me finish. It's an old joke. Cut it out of the thing.
No,
anyway,
that's a good joke.
So okay, why did we get to that? Because Nagasaki, Hiroshima. So Truman dropped the bombs, and won the war. And then the next guy is
Eisenhower.
I only have one good Eisenhower story that I saw told by his son after Eisenhower retired. He was a fucking general. He was a general.
Yeah.
He killed Hitler.
Yeah.
And then he was president.
And he was a president in a very good time. He's one of the few presidents that just
1950s.
He kind of started Vietnam, but
yes,
he was right?
damn good, meaty part of our history.
And Korea. But other than that,
Eisenhower Interstate is because of him. I went too far. So I will go back to the beginning of the Eisenhower thing. I could totally listen to I really do. I read about Eisenhower just 2 years ago. Did not know much outside of the basic, and I came away really impressed with him. So when I went and visited Truman's house, Truman was one of those things where I just wanted to go to. Just kind of seemed like one of those guys, one of those folksy type of guys, like that grandfather I said. Eisenhower comes across as somebody I think Eisenhower, a person like Eisenhower he would have been a good president in really any era. Because he was a general. So clearly a military guy. May have harbored some bigoted stance. But it didn't show through. And look what he did. I mean, he helped get segregation break segregation in schools. So Eisenhower he really did care. But this isn't about Eisenhower, unfortunately. And they went it's just a short Eisenhower, a little bit of Nixon. Kennedy. I wonder what they'll talk about Kennedy. Okay, I'm going to end this here. There's a thanks button on the channel. You can donate if you'd like. You don't have to. You can subscribe, give a thumbs up. If you want to give a thumbs down, then what happened to Kennedy will happen to your favorite stuffed animal. Yeah, and you don't want that. So until next time, have a good day, have a good night.